Hello, my name is Ethan Hewlin. Like you, I live in a world that never stops moving. Also, like you, I have stories. These are my stories. The true stories of a tryhard. Welcome back to True Stories of a Tryhard. I am Ethan Hewlin, and this week I am back with another special guest. Please welcome Ben. Ben, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, listeners, Ben's partner, Brienne, was the first guest I've ever had. She's made a couple of other appearances on here. And it's been quite a bit of a process to get him on here, so I'm really glad that he's here. So, Ben, could you tell listeners a bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Ben. I'm 25. I'm French, but I was born and grew up in Belgium, and I currently live in Queensland, which is in Australia. And I have inattentive type ADHD, which I guess is why I'm here today.
Yep, that's what we're going to be talking about today is neurodivergency, specifically in adults, because as you were telling me, you have kind of an interesting story as far as how you got there. So,
Yeah.
so what led you to realize that maybe you weren't neurotypical, as it were?
I think I first realized when I was 22. Yeah, 22, I think, around then. When I was just scrolling on Twitter and I found a thread of someone with ADHD that described their experience, and it really clicked with me, and therefore I started researching it, and so that it definitely clicked a lot with me, and then so that's where it started, and then the process from there to getting diagnosed was quite a bit longer, but
What was that process like?
yeah. So after I saw the initial thread, which led me to look into ADHD a lot more. So I was seeing a psychologist at the time for something. I'll say unrelated. It turns out in the end it was kind of all tied, but for something I thought was unrelated. And then at the time I brought up the subject, and what my therapist at the time told me was just that I was just basically I was just smart, and that's the way the smart brain works, and therefore she didn't think I had ADHD. So that was about 3 years ago, and then after a while I stopped seeing her because she retired, and I anyway moved interstate, and so I started seeing a new therapist, and once again brought up the subject, and he thought I might have it, and therefore he referred me to a psychiatrist, because here in Australia, to be properly diagnosed and to be able to be put on medication and stuff, you have to get your diagnosis from a psychiatrist. Therefore, I got my referral, and the first psychiatrist I saw basically didn't listen to me at all. It felt like he had made his mind up just based on the referral he had received, and I didn't feel heard at all, and that was a bit hard. First of all, there was like a 3 month wait or something to get the appointment with him. So waiting so long in the hope of getting a diagnosis at the end and just being dismissed like that was quite hard. And then afterwards, it was also hard to know what to do next, because I didn't want to be. You see with these people that keep seeing doctor after doctor until they get the diagnosis they thought they had, just to be able to get it. And on the one hand, I didn't want to be that person. On the other hand, I felt like there was something that therefore I needed a second opinion. So I went back, got a referral to another psychiatrist, and he was much better and actually listened to me. And so the first step with that psychiatrist was that he acknowledged that there was an attention deficit. So I'll go back a little bit. So like ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It it's kind of like the combination of two previous conditions that were called ADD, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity. People over the time have realized that they're actually kind of two sides of the same coin, and therefore there's now ADHD that has three different types. There's inattentive type, which is mainly when your brain's hyperactive and you have struggle with attention. Either you lack it or you have way too much of it and you start hyper focusing on things. Then you have hyperactive type ADHD, where it's more a physical type of hyperactivity, a lot of running around, fidgeting, not able to sit still. And the third type is combined, where you have the first two at the same time. And so my psychiatrist acknowledged that I had an attention deficit, which would be the first step to be able to be diagnosed with inattentive type ADHD. However, it took a few sessions to be able to determine whether ADHD was actually the source of this attention deficit, or whether the attention deficit was a symptom of something else. He thought it could potentially be something called complex PTSD, which is kind of like PTSD, but instead of coming from a single traumatic event, it would be like from a repeated smaller trauma that would have come from my childhood, with like attachment issues with my parents and things like that. But it turns out I actually do have ADHD, and once that was determined, I was able to start on the medication. So the medication he prescribed to me was Ritalin. And at first, like the way the medication is presented to you is a bit like, here's this medication. It's not going to fix your ADHD, because it's not something you can cure. Like you have it or you don't, and if you have it, it's for life. And you don't develop it, like you have it from birth and that's it.
Right.
And so that I knew it wasn't something that it was going to cure my ADHD, but I was under the impression that you take the medication and all of a sudden it's almost as if you don't have it. The thing is, for me, what it did for me is like, it helped me really, it helped me with the attention, and like, it's almost like I knew once I got started with a task, I'd therefore be able to actually commit to it and finish, which is something I really struggled when I was undiagnosed, and shortly after my diagnosis when I wasn't yet on the medication. That's one of the main issues I have with my ADHD, is that I really struggle to get started on the task once I'm on it, to actually keep going, especially if it's a task that doesn't stimulate my brain. It's almost like all or nothing. Either the task is too boring for my brain, really struggling to focus on it, won't keep my attention on it if I even start doing it, or that's all my brain wants to do and I just do it for hours on end. I can forget to hydrate and things like that while I'm on it. So with the medication, I could feel that if I started a task, I'd be able to properly do it, even if it's not the type of task that my brain would normally be good at. But the thing it didn't really help with was actually getting started with the task, and I almost had to undo 25 years of conditioning that if a task looked boring, I was I was going to have to deal with something really boring. I wouldn't say quite painful, but really hard, and taking a lot of attention and energy to keep going at it, and really overall I'm setting myself up to have a really bad time ahead of me when I start a boring task. And that took a lot, and I'm still actually working on trying to undo this sort of conditioning that I had from when I wasn't on the ADHD meds. That now I know that if I start a task, I'll be able to finish it and won't particularly have a bad time doing it, but I still have that block of actually starting the task.
Wow, that's kind of similar to what happened with my sister. So my sister is 16. She was diagnosed with ADHD when she was early elementary school. I forget exactly what age she was. But as some of you may know, and Ben, you may know this as well, ADHD can be a comorbidity, meaning it can be linked with other mental disorders as well, and my sister is also on the autism spectrum. So she has combined ADHD and she's on the autism spectrum, which made like school and schoolwork very hard for her, and also making friends very hard for her. And it was a very similar process to what you were describing just now, where she was on her meds and either they wouldn't work or they wouldn't work as well as my mom wanted them to, and so she has actually bounced around to a bunch of different therapists and other people like that to kind of hopefully figure that out. And actually right now she's doing outpatient therapy because of that. So she's still trying to figure out exactly what to do with that, but it's been a process for her. And actually, I think I've yet to get this professionally diagnosed, but I think I might have inattentive ADHD as well, just based on some of the things that you were describing that I've realized about myself. Just the not wanting to complete a test that doesn't stimulate my brain, just forgetting nearly everything unless I have it written down, and several other things. But it's not something that I thought would ever affect me, just because I don't really think of myself as being similar to her in that way. But I also have to consider that we don't have the same kind if I was to be diagnosed, because mine sounds more of the inattentive, whereas hers is the combined. So
Yeah. I definitely also kind of have that because my brother-in-law also has both combined ADHD and is on the autism spectrum, and therefore there is that part of when you compare yourself to other people you know that might have it, and as you say, at first it's hard because when you look at ADHD, it matches, but when you compare yourself to someone you know that has it doesn't necessarily, but you have to remind yourself, we don't necessarily have the same type. He had combined, I had inattentive. He's also on the autism spectrum, which I'm not. So there's all of these differences that means I can't just compare myself to him and say, oh, if I'm like him, I also have ADHD. If I'm not like him, it means I don't have it. And there's that. That's to keep in mind. But for what you were saying, of course, I'm not a professional. I'm not diagnosing you, but it's very possible considering there is a genetic component to ADHD, and it's often hereditary. And if your parents have it, you're more likely to get it. And if therefore one of your siblings has it, it's possible one of your parents had it, and therefore you would have it too.
Oh yeah, Ben, I should probably mention my sister's adopted.
Yeah, that would help. Not that it would help, but yeah, sorry, I didn't take that into account.
Hey tryhards, Ethan here. I want to talk to you guys about Patreon. Patreon is a donation service, a monthly subscription service where you donate money to me to support the show, to support the growth of it, whether that means merchandise or more podcasts or other things of that nature. And I would really appreciate if you guys will be willing and able to give just a little bit of whatever extra money you may have. Because while the show will always be free for everyone to listen, the way to make it isn't. And I'm in college, and things are expensive. So I'd appreciate any little amount that you're able to give. So thank you for donating, and thank you even more for listening. And if either of my parents have it, I don't know about it, because as far as I know, neither of them were diagnosed with it. My parents have anxiety, at least my mom does, so that's where I get it from her. But that's the extent of my knowledge as far as hereditary mental disorders goes from my family.
Yeah. I was kind of in the same boat. I didn't know of any particular diagnosis for my parents before starting that journey, and once I shared with them my diagnosis and um, explain what I saw in myself that made me think I had ADHD, and also therefore kind of looking back on growing up and my childhood and being like my interaction with them, kind of trying to explain and be able to describe, not quite describe, but like put a like a reason behind some of the behaviors I might have. Like for example, when I was in high school, I was really struggling with doing my homework in some of the subjects I really didn't like, but I was like straight A student in the subjects I did really like. So there was that aspect, and so like I wanted to share all of that with them, and describing all of that with them. My dad said, "Oh, like I wonder if I might have it because what you're saying sounds very similar." So yeah, before starting that journey, I didn't know if any of my parents had it, or even before I started looking in all of that, I didn't particularly know it could be hereditary, and therefore I didn't know to look in my parents too, but therefore talking with them, I discovered it's quite possible that my dad has it too.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting because like it's a lot more widely diagnosed now than it has been in the past, and that may be a reason why they may not know is because it just wasn't as common for people to be diagnosed back then.
Oh, for sure. It's quite interesting, actually. I read recently that there was a spike in diagnosis during the pandemic. Actually, I got diagnosed during the pandemic. I don't feel like it was particularly linked to it because I didn't really feel the effects of it. Thankfully, living in Australia on an island, we're quite isolated, so we've been able to keep our cases quite down, and therefore haven't felt the pandemic too much. So I don't feel like my diagnosis was linked to it, but I thought it was quite interesting that there was a spike lately in the number of diagnoses recorded.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know if mine came out of it, but I also like the pandemic and giving me so much more time to like reflect. There's been a lot of self-reflection happening for me in multiple areas of my life, and seeing things where it's like if you have ADHD, you might forget almost everything you do unless you write it down, which I have to write things down, otherwise I won't remember that I need to do them or that they're important. I don't mean to forget things, I just do. Like, my parents like to say, Ethan, you forget your own head if it wasn't attached to your body. So,
Yeah.
it's
that's
it's something.
Yeah, that's for sure. And actually, that's something I also wanted to touch on is that on top of medication, there's a lot of just coping mechanisms in general to be able to dampen the effects of ADHD, if I can say it like that. Like for example, is that like when I go food shopping, my rule is if I have to buy more than two things, I have to write a list because I know I can't remember more than two things I have to buy. Lately, I've been struggling a lot with all I'll say the tasks that never end. It's like doing the dishes, cooking, doing the laundry, and all of that. The chores that you do and they're still there after you've done them because there's just more of it. And I've been really struggling with that because that boring task that I feel like it never ends really doesn't go well with ADHD, and therefore I've been having to find coping mechanisms for it. For example, one of the things I really struggle with is always having to figure out what to eat, let alone actually cook it, like going shopping and eating it. And so what I've had to do is like at the end of the week on a Sunday, I have to make a plan for the week ahead. I don't necessarily meal prep in the sense that I don't like cook all my food in one go and then eat it throughout the week, but I do have to make my food plan ahead because I know that if I don't, every day I'm gonna be like, oh, I have no idea what I'm gonna eat today, and then it's gonna have a big effect on my mental health, make my depression worse as it goes. Like the more you do it and every day, it just adds on the the effect it had the day before, and yeah, it's quite hard, but yeah, you have to find coping mechanism. It's not all the medication. You still have to do quite a bit of work on yourself to
Right.
be able to find how to cope better with it.
Yeah, definitely. Um, like it, like medications, at least, in my experience, have never been, a cure-all. There's always something else that you have to do to make sure that they work. Like
Yeah.
it's not a one time. It's not a magic pill that you can just take and everything will be better.
No. And a lot of these coping mechanisms even come from before I had my diagnosis and just things I had to do to be able to cope with life. Like when I was in high school, in school in general, I lost so many points on tests because I was like skipping questions because I didn't even realize they were there, and therefore I learned that at the end of a test I have to read through every single question to make sure I've actually answered them all, because I would just not notice that the question was there and stuff like that. And so yeah, there's a lot of these coping mechanisms that don't necessarily come from my therapy since I've been diagnosed. It's just things I've had to come up with over the years, just from living my ADHD life, not knowing I had it.
And that's actually one of the things that tipped me off to kind of think in terms of maybe I do have this because you know growing up I would miss a lot of points on tests as well because I would like read like half the question and I'm like, oh, I know what to do, and then it would be the wrong answer because I didn't read the full thing. So yeah, I've had to go back through tests and make sure I answered the question fully, which has caused me to lose quite a few points over the course of my 13, 14 years of public schooling. So
Yeah.
it's it's surprising to me because I never really thought of like it wasn't really until after my parents split up that I really like began to understand, or at least try to understand, that maybe I'm not quite like everybody else. And like my mom tried to explain it to me because she has anxiety. It's something that she's had to work throughout her life, and especially during that time. Um, and I think that's kind of what may have accelerated that a little bit because trauma on a 9-year-old. Um, but the ADHD part is something that I really hadn't considered because I had, as far as I knew, no like hereditary reference for it. Like I can't say, oh, my grandpa's ADHD or my uncle is ADHD or something like that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate with that. I also didn't have a family frame of reference of I could just see someone else and say, "Oh, you have it. Maybe I should look into it because it sounds quite similar." Because I was the first of my family to get that diagnosis. You really have no frame of reference, and also I come from a family where we don't talk much, especially about the deep stuff, and therefore um, mental health and all of that was barely talked about, if talked about at all, and therefore I didn't really know what ADHD was. Like I vaguely knew it was a thing I had heard, but I didn't know what it was actually like to have it. And like you just have your stereotypes on it. Like you picture like a 9 year old that can't sit still and that spends the whole time they're home just running around in the garden and being crazy and until they crash in bed, and then as soon as they get up they start again. Yeah, I had, I think, all these stereotypes that I had to unbuild first, where and be able to learn what ADHD was actually like for people with it, and then being able to relate to it and to see, oh, it actually sounds a lot like what I experience on a daily basis, and therefore I should actually look into it and see if that's something I actually have, or if it just sounds similar but something else. Like,
Yeah, it is definitely something that I've been looking into to getting tested for, because like if I have this, like I want to know what I can do about it, because like I don't like missing small things. I don't like forgetting things. It's just, I wouldn't say accidental. It's just not purposeful.
yeah, I absolutely get that. Like the amount of, I've stopped counting how many times in a day I lose my phone and things like that. I just, it's somewhere in the house, inside the house. I just don't know where, and I've, like I had it in less than a minute before on me, and I can't find it for the life of me. And it's sometimes it's frustrating, and you have to remind yourself it's it's not something wrong with you. It's not you're not doing it on purpose. It's not anything like that. It's just the way your brain works. Your brain's not good at remembering that type of information, and that's it. And I think growing up, this whole part of it's not you, it's just the brain, your way your brain works. It was quite hard, especially not having that diagnosis until I was 25. When I was back in school, there was like so many of my teachers would say I have so much like wasted potential, and if I only applied myself more, I'd be able to get so much better grades and things like that. And because I would like miss questions on tests or not read them properly, and or not do my homework because it wasn't a subject that really interested me. But when I was participating in class and when I was on test, I was still doing relatively good despite all the missed questions. And so my grades weren't to the point of failing, and therefore I was kind of almost like passed through the nets. And it wasn't core, but there was still all these little comments and stuff that makes it quite hard. And like for example, when I shared my diagnosis with my parents, they were like, this whole period in high school where you were really struggling with your homework, like my parents, they said to me like, we thought you were just lazy, like, and it can be hard to hear, but at the same time, I also understand how it can be seen that way on an outsider perspective. But and that's, I understand it's not necessarily on your teachers to notice you have ADHD, even though they can definitely help. I think your
Yeah,
own family, there's a bit, at least my perception is that there is a bit more um, responsibility on them to be able to notice these things growing up. And therefore I was a bit, like, it was a bit hard. Like when I told them when I was 25, they said, "Oh, yeah, looking back, it actually makes sense."
yeah,
There was a bit of resentment. If it does make sense, you could have seen it sooner. But I understand why they didn't.
absolutely. All right, Ben, we are approaching wrap time. Do you have any encouraging words for listeners who might think they might be neurodivergent?
Um, it's not you. um, Also, getting a diagnosis can definitely help. However, it's definitely not the only option. I understand that it's not always an option for many people. It can take a lot of time. It can be hard to be taken seriously, as I've personally experienced, and I'm lucky enough. It might be a bad expression, but yeah, I'll say I'm lucky enough to be male, and a lot of the diagnosis tools for ADHD have been written for males, and I know for a lot of women, it's very hard to get that diagnosis, or at least a lot harder than it is for men, because ADHD can present itself differently in women. So I know I'm extremely privileged to have had the means and to have been taken seriously by a medical professional that I have been able to get my diagnosis. I know it's not the case for everyone. So to me, self-diagnosis is absolutely fine, and do look it up. Do look at all the coping mechanisms. I know there's a massive community of ADHD people on Twitter. Look up the hashtags like ADHD and there's a few others there, of course, I've forgotten, but if you just search ADHD, you find others, and you'll find a lot of really helpful tips, and you can even ask questions and all of that. So, yeah, I think my biggest tip is engage with other people. You learn a lot about how to cope, and you learn a lot about yourself, and that is in a way almost as valuable, if not more, than getting a medical diagnosis in itself.
All right, thank you, Ben. Where can people find you on the internet if you're comfortable with that?
I'm mainly only active on Twitter because it's tiny messages, so it's really useful for ADHD. At ADHD_Ben. Ben, just BEN.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week to True Stories of a Tryhard. You can find me on Instagram at ethan.t.hulen. That's HULEN. You can find me on Twitter at ETPhoneHome. The O's are zeros, the E's are threes. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at True Stories Pod. The best way to get the word out about podcasts is via word of mouth and social media. So please, please, please share this with your friends. Share it on your social media. And if you post it in some way and tag me, you will get featured on the official podcast accounts. And please feel free to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I would very much appreciate it. I'll be back with more stories next week. So until then, this is Ethan Hewlin and Ben signing off.